Can we come back together for our last session today? So we've just got a very short piece on a new idea that we're developing, a community-led housing alliance. So we'll talk a wee bit about that, and then our final session for today, final plenary session, the first part of that is around innovations in engagement and some fantastic work that two of our members in Sanka and Langholm have been undertaking, share that experience with you. And then we've got a final session, just a bit about CLS and the changes within Community Land Scotland and the response to the Perth Declaration that lots of you were here last year contributed to. We'll finish then at 5:30, and anyone that's not a member is free to depart. If you're a member, we'd ask if you could just stay on with us for a really short period of time, just for our extraordinary general meeting where we're looking at making some changes to the Memonots of Community Land Scotland. But I say that's just for members. We'll absolutely be away in plenty of time for dinner. So if that's all okay, I just want to tell you a little bit about some work we're doing on community-led housing. And as everybody in this room will know, action on housing is absolutely fundamental to ensuring that our communities can grow and thrive. And there's a pressing need for more affordable, good quality permanent homes across rural and island Scotland and in urban areas too. And where those are needed, quite often we're finding that communities are leading on the provision of them. And that's partly because, partly because others aren't providing homes of the right kinds in the right places that people can afford. And therefore community bodies are having to step in, some willingly and some less willingly. And they're showing great agility and a capacity for innovation, which is essential if local housing needs are to be met. But we know that when communities lead on housing, the benefits extend far beyond providing just more houses or flats, far beyond just the numbers which Scottish Government count. With community leadership on housing, it becomes a pillar of community development, community wealth building and local action on key issues such as poverty, welfare, depopulation, the local economy and the climate emergency. So Scottish Government support has been essential to the delivery of most community-led homes, and it's underpinned the development of a substantial and growing pipeline of projects which have the potential to deliver so much more in the coming years. And we've been doing some work recently on numbers, and those are in the hundreds of houses that are going to be delivered. But this substantial pipeline is at risk without greater commitment to community-led housing from Scotland's main political parties. So to secure that commitment, the sector needs to come together, speak with a common voice and campaign in the run-up to the 2026 Scottish Parliament election for continued and enhanced support for the sector. So to that end, we're forming a community-led housing alliance, bringing together community organisations, representatives across Scotland, intermediaries like us and our allies. And that alliance is being coordinated by Scotland's community housing enablers, many of whom you'll know. So that's South of Scotland Community Housing and the Communities Housing Trust, together with Community Land Scotland. So over the coming months, members of the alliance are going to work together to develop that shared vision for community-led housing, document all the great work that's been achieved so far, and evidence what could be achieved with the right support in the next parliamentary term. We're going to develop a shared manifesto with proposals for how communities can best be supported to deliver much needed homes. And we're then going to go on and campaign for the adoption of our proposals and for greater support for community-led housing during the next term of the Scottish Parliament. And we know that this issue matters to many of you in the room. Many of you are taking forward projects, and therefore we really encourage you to join the Alliance and help develop its voice and our shared asks of politicians, Parliament and the Government. So over the course of the coming months, we're going to be inviting you to take part in in-person events in various parts of the country, online gatherings and other surveys. But at this stage, we're only at the early stages of just gathering interest, starting to work up what this proposal will look like. So we would just like you, if you've got time, to express an interest on the SOSH and joint SOSH and CHT stall downstairs in the marketplace, and sign up to receive further information. Now, I know quite a lot of you have done that already, but if you could just remember just to pop along to the stall and give them your details. And I think they're just asking you, are you developing a project? Are you thinking of developing a project? So if you could do that, that would be really helpful, and then we'll be back in touch with you quite soon to look at doing these in-person events, and that's where we'll be asking for your specific experience and advice and thoughts about how we can start to develop this housing manifesto to influence the government post-May 2026. So hopefully that all makes sense. Please go and see them. If anyone's got any questions, please talk to myself afterwards or talk to colleagues from SOSH or Communities Housing Trust, and we can give you a bit more information on that. Okay, great, thank you for that. I obviously didn't print my notes off, that's why I had to read them on. So the next session is going to be led by Linsay, and this is Rooted in Community Innovations and Engagement. And we all know, and I was just in the last session here for West Coast Community Energy, actually how critical good quality engagement is with our communities, and how critical that is both to the success of those individual projects, but about building the capacity and reach of individual community organisations. So I'm going to invite Linsay and Angela and Yvonne to come up to take this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Ailsa. This is a subject I'm sure it's close to a lot of our hearts, because community ownership is a democratic model and community engagement sits at the centre of it. The community is where we get our ideas from and our energy a lot of the time, but I'm sure all of us know it can also be a little bit challenging. I've been trying to pitch this idea for years that we should just take all the difficult people in all our communities and put them on an island and see how they all work together, but I've been told that's not in the spirit of community ownership. But our team has noticed over the last year we've been getting asked more and more tips on community engagement, so we have two brilliant people here today to share their stories. So we have Yvonne Barber from all the Airts in Sanker. Yvonne has a long career in arts and education. She's now the manager of all the Airts, a lovely community-owned building in Sanker that works a lot with young people. And Angela's probably a familiar face to many of you. I first met her when she was on our board, when she was at the Neudart Foundation, so she's got a lot of experience to share. Currently working as the development manager at Langholm Initiative, so really excited to hear both of those stories. So I'll invite Yvonne up to speak first. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. So I'm Yvonne, and I'm the centre manager at all the Airts. When I first went there, because I'm English, I called it the Airts, and I kept getting corrected by my community, which is right. And it means all the elements, and that's what we've tried to do at our centre. So it started off as a dream of the community in 2004, and they raised the money for the first stage of the build, and it opened in 2010. I took over as the centre manager in 2017, and we're a registered charity. So just to put you in the picture, in 2023, we had a capital build project that almost finished the building. When I first came for my interview, I remember them saying to me, we have this building that's been purchased through community land next door. What are you going to do to find the money? And I can remember coming away thinking, is this really the job for me? Since then, we've gone from strength to strength. So the build happened. We raised £1.2 million to complete that. And funnily enough, that was the money that the original building cost in the first place. So it's been a £2.4 million project. And it's a dream job for me because it brings together all the skills that I've acquired over the years. Used to work in a very steady job in the public sector in further education, and now work for a charity where I have to find my salary every year, and I have to prove that I'm worth that salary. I work with 22 loyal volunteers, and we have 13 members of staff that work for us who are employed. So we have lots of things going on in the centre. We have craft shop where local crafters can sell their goods. We have events, we have a cafe, we have craft rooms, a theatre space, which is only small, but it does the job. And we have classes for the community. That's our little theatre space there. And one of the things that we have to do is try and make some commercial income, obviously. Can't just be fully reliant on grants. So we have the shop that sells goods, the cafe that basically last year turned over 113,000, which might not sound a lot of money, but it's a small rural village where we're working. And we also work with the community to find out what they want. So one of the things that we sell and that is manufactured on site by the local people is a Sanka knitting, and the town has its own pattern, a bit like Fair Isle pattern, and so we have those sold in our shop, and we employ local people to make those items. The gloves that you can see there on the picture, they're actually well famous and sold a lot in Japan, so we export a lot of those. We developed a visitor's experience so that people come to us for half a day from Canada and America, and they spend a full half day with us, and they learn how to knit, and they hear about the history of the town. So that's a very interesting thing that we do. Community engagement has been key. Linsay just alluded to the fact that not everyone in the community is always happy with arts organisations. And I think I spent my first sort of couple of weeks speaking to the community and finding out what was wrong with the place, not what was right with the place. So that's interesting. So what we did, or what I did initially, was speak to the local schools. So I was told that we were a cafe with an arts centre. And I thought, oh, that's not good. What we want to be is an arts centre with a cafe. So we did a lot of work with the schools, and we have 5-6 after school groups. So we run a youth theatre, we have a film group, and Community Land funded our film just a few months ago, and we've got a young filmmaker who's just gone into the Into Film Awards, and he's a finalist this year, so we're very proud of him. After school craft classes, we've got a young heritage group, so we teach them about the heritage of the knitting. So we're doing all that we can to engage our young people, and I think we're doing now a fairly good job of it. But then I would say no. We've also got craft classes, we have events that run in the centre. So for example, the picture that you can see here is an evening class. People from the community can come along for free. We raise funding for that. If we can feed people at the same time, we do, and we try to make sure that they've got a good say in what goes on. So lots of surveys, lots of asking people what works, what doesn't work. Going back to the commercial income, we have every Friday night we have an event that is a paid event, so people will come and see a film, or they'll have a meal. But we also try on those nights to engage the community again, in that we employ local people to sing so that they get paid to do it. And we also make sure that if anybody's got any ideas that they're brought forward. So an idea was a book swap event. Who knew it would be so popular? We had 40 odd people at the last one, which doesn't sound a lot, but in a small community it's quite good numbers for us. And they came along, and local authors spoke at that event. We had food on for the community. So we're going to do a few more of those because that was popular. So some things don't work. We've got conclave on tomorrow night. We've got 30 odd people. We can only seat 40 to 50. But other weeks there might only be 6 there. And then you feel disappointed, but you've just got to keep going and keep asking what's going wrong. In terms of our young people, we are working with the schools, and these 3 young women here were learning how to do the Sanka knitting. We've got a young heritage group that runs at the school, and we're trying to keep the whole knitting story alive and pass that on through the generations. This is our film and photography group, so a lot of teenagers in that group who are interested in the arts. And that's the main aim of the centre, is just to engage the community and give them opportunities to be able to take part in anything that's arts related. Just before I finish, one thing I will say is that post-COVID we've had to change what we do as well. People are struggling for money, there's a cost of living crisis, so we have got a food initiative that runs weekly where people can come up and pick up community food, and we also deliver to 20 people in the community who are elderly, so they get a bag of shopping or they get afternoon tea, whatever they need. So that's everything. I'll take questions at the end. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me here to talk about the work that we're doing in Langholm on the development of the Terrace Valley Nature Reserve. My name's Angela Williams. I've been the development manager with the initiative since 2021. Langholm, for those of you who don't know, it's located down in Dumfries and Galloway. It's a town of around 2,000 people. It's a former mill town. Over the years, the mill industry has declined from 6,000 workers coming into the town to just one working mill at the moment, which has obviously had quite a significant impact on the town, on the high street, etc. The main employers now retail, bit of public sector, but an awful lot of community and charity-based organisations who provide an awful lot of services in the town. The Langholm Initiative is a development trust of nearly 30 years standing, and over the years it has undertaken many successful projects, but none more so, I think, than the purchase of 10,500 acres of land from Buccleuch in 2021 and 2022, south of Scotland's largest community land purchase, raising 6.2 million. So now we're the proud owners of 10,500 acres, 9 properties, including 6 residential, an upland sheep farm, all the tracks, private water supplies, everything else that comes with owning the land. Linsay kindly gave me 3 questions to try and cover in this talk. And the first one, which was, when a buyout happens so fast, how do you keep the community engaged? And I really should bat this back to her, because I suspect Linsay knows more about that than I do. The staff team wasn't there at that point, but from what we've learned from talking to a lot of folk, the land was put on the market by Buccleuch in 2019. This raised a huge amount of concern in the town, and to the extent that the local paper was holding the press and did a special insert to raise awareness of this. I don't think it had occurred to anybody that Buccleuch would ever sell the land, and certainly was no interest, I suspect, in registering an interest in the land. As a development trust that was up and running with a board and staff, the initiative started to take the response to the community concerns and explore whether or not buying the land was a viable option. The area that was for sale was Langholm Moor, in total 25,000 acres, half in Dumfries and Galloway, half in the borders. We were just interested in the land on the Dumfries and Galloway side. That fitted in with our operational remit. It had a small paid staff at the time, and one of the employees was able to spend time in developing the concept for buying the land. But that individual had a phenomenally strong volunteer group who were the boots on the ground. They were the folk who went round, I think, knocking on every single door in the town to get the petition signed, to distribute prospectuses, doing all that door knocking. Now, obviously, this started in 2019, 2020. As we all know, things changed drastically with COVID coming in. And looking back on it, I think there's a sort of general feel that COVID obviously had a lot of negative side with regard to this process because you couldn't have face-to-face meetings. How did you do consultation? How did you arrange this? But I think on the positive side, what it did mean was that there was an awful lot of people, not just in the town, but regionally, nationally and internationally, who were looking for good news stories in all the crap that was going on in the world. And so as we were going through the process and business plans were being developed, there was the interest just grew and grew and grew. The consultation took place locally, but nationally there was newspaper reports. We had, there was constant sort of filmmakers asking for information. And we were hugely lucky to have the volunteer services of a PR guy, Richard Bunting, who made sure that I think we were probably in a paper somewhere every single day. And so getting the support for the business model that was put forward of buying the land as a nature reserve gained that local support and traction. So now we're in the position where we bought it in 2 tranches. How do we actually make people realise that they own the land? I think it's something that's quite often common with community land buyouts. You've gone through all the excitement of doing the purchase, but what does it mean that we own it and that it's ours? And we do say that success will be when people start to say the land is ours and not theirs. But in Langholm, the irony of that is that the town has really huge cultural links to the land because of the common riding. If you come to Langholm on the last Friday in July, you will see the A7 closed, 10,000 people taking part in the ride out, the main common riding. So people in one level do see the land as theirs. And in fact, a lot of the anti-comments about us buying the land were because, well, that's fine, but we shouldn't have to pay for it. It's ours, it's not Buccleuch's. But unfortunately, legal title did actually sit with Buccleuch. And I think there's an issue there about responsibility as well, the responsibilities that come with land ownership. And the ride out and people taking part in that is one aspect of land ownership, but it's about the opportunities that land ownership can bring and taking on the responsibility for making sure that the land the community does benefit from it. As a team, we're absolutely committed to the town benefiting from the reserve. The land is in walking distance, the southern bit, from the town, but it doesn't actually come down into it. But we use local tractors, services, locations. We're looking at buying office space on the high street so that we can improve accessibility. We do lots of education and work with young people on the reserve. And whenever we're starting an activity, it's how actually can we get that benefit back into the land. So if we start with guided walks, they'll start in the town. We'll get people coming into the town in the first instance. So how did we manage community engagement to develop our 5-year plan? It's not a strategic plan, James, sorry. It's very much an action plan. There's nothing new in the approach that we took, nothing novel, we just did a lot of listening. We were under pressure to develop a land management plan, but we quietly fought back against that. And again, this was as a staff team because we realised that wasn't the right time. So we wanted to refresh the community mandate from the original business plan. We wanted to make sure that people who hadn't contributed had a chance to come and talk to us. So for over 2 years, we gave talks, stalls in the co-op, Love Langholm, we did film nights, wherever people were, we would go there. So talking and listening and getting feedback. Even our walks into work were part of that process. It could take an awful long time for that 5-minute walk into work to take place sometimes. Did a lot on social media, got a website, did project-specific consultation. There was one meeting we attended that was a little bit of a wake-up call for us. We were invited by the NFU to come and talk to the local group. Oh, there'll only be 8 or 9 people there. We don't get that many people. So when the 40 or so people were crammed into the room, what we realised at the end of that meeting was the misunderstandings about what community ownership was, what it meant, and who legally owned the land and who legally was going to develop it. And the idea that this was the Langholm Initiative, community owned, community have a majority on the board. It wasn't the RSPB, it wasn't the John Muir Trust, it wasn't any of the other environmental bodies who we often referred to in press releases. It was local people who were going to determine that business plan and what happened on that reserve. And we realised then that we had got a bit of a hill to climb. We had to build trust and honesty and be transparent. And we've worked really hard on that. I'm not saying we've always got it right. We will make mistakes, but we will always try and admit that. And we acknowledge that, yes, we've got the plan, and that plan just about acknowledges every single bit of feedback we've had in those 50 or so events that we've attended and took part in. But it's an ongoing process. We're still very, very new. We'll still continue to consult on key projects, but we will make sure we're available wherever we can be to continue just to talk and listen to people. And I'm sorry I've gone over time.
Thanks to both of you. It was really interesting to hear. I think we've got about nearly 10 minutes now for Q&A, but I'll just kick things off. One thing that we get asked fairly regularly is about consultation fatigue. So how do you go about making sure you're doing really good community engagement without people getting tired? Do you weave it into what you're doing? Do you do it once every few years in a bag? How do you? I'll ask you first, Yvonne.
Okay. So we tend to weave it into whatever we do. If a project is finished, then we ask the question, how did it go? If it's a new project that's started, what do you think this should look like? So any funding that we get, we're trying to make sure we're listening to the community. It's coming up. But other than that, now and then we will do a survey. We move it in the cafe there, we're trying to get the cafe staff to talk to people to come in, try and talk about what we're trying to find out and then move that.
Try to outline there, we've done a lot of probably more listening than consulting in some ways. It's a very new organisation. We were, well, very new starting rather. We were well aware that we had to kind of provide our own credentials. We were aware that a lot of consultation has taken place in the past, and people would come and say, well, there's no point in saying anything because nothing ever happens. So we had to try and, I suppose, reframe the narrative there, which is why we spent a lot of time just having drop-ins at an event where something was happening. So it wasn't, oh, come down and talk to us at our consultation event. It was about, we're going to be here if you want to come and find out. We will still sometimes do a very specific consultation. For example, we need some felling, a lot of discussion, consultation on that. So where it's project specific and we know there are people with a specific interest, that works well because we might only get 5 people out of the town, but those 5 people are absolutely committed to finding out about it. And I think it's about feeding back. So there's that little bit of you asked, we did, or you said, we did. And we're lucky that we've got a very good local board who have their ears to the ground and they will feed back to us if we get it right.
Thank you both. Can I ask if there's any questions from the audience? David. And can I ask that people hold the microphone to their mouth because just so it gets picked up?
Yeah, I have sort of a position where I don't feel like we should buy land from billionaires. It's sort of different on the line question. And then just wondering if you can maybe say a bit about so the practice of the common writing, which kind of mark out commons, like how would you continue to incorporate that as a cultural practice now that there's been a sort of confession that there's been a confession that there is no commons and one piece of land, all the sort of side question that is whether like much investigation done down like in the point program we have like people use fund for land. So I wonder what happened with that when the blue states started on the other thing. Where that this was.
Can't make any comments about the common good. As far as I'm aware from the bit of exploration associated with Langham, not saying it doesn't exist, but from the little bit that I've done on it, I couldn't find anything about it. With regard to the common riding, we don't have to do anything. The common riding has its own committees. Each of the ride-out has its own committees. There's a main common riding committee, and they will continue with that tradition as long as there is interest and support. So it's not going to be stopping anytime soon. And we don't actually have to do anything. It's very much that local tradition.
Do you have any more questions? Can you say who you are and where you're from as well?
Thanks, yeah. It's more a question of how the panel manages the issue of consulting members of a legal body that often owns the asset and the wider community. And how do you sort of balance that out? So maybe you're not members of your organisation.
It's a good question. We've got 11 board members who are all local. And some have been on the board since the very beginning of the project. So that helps us get our way to the board. 22 local volunteers. So even if the community aren't telling me what to do, they will feed it back to them and then you do something about it. So that's my idea.
Yeah, I'm assuming if it came down to something where it was a vote, then that would be limited to members. But otherwise, when we're consulting and discussing or talking to them, we don't distinguish between members and non-members if we're working in the community.
Any final questions before we wrap up the session? Well, just looking forward to your dinner tonight already. I'd like to say thanks very much to Yvonne and Angela for a really interesting session.
And a really good indication there of the breadth of assets that Community Land Scotland members own and within a very short distance of each other. Okay, so now final session of the day. I'm going to invite Josh and Linsay. Josh is our He will tell you what his new title is, and Linsay will tell you what her new title is, to present about the work of CLS and what we've done in response to the Perth Declaration that was developed in the conference last year. We'll have a time for a short Q&A afterwards, so again, think of any questions. Thanks, Josh and Linsay.
So yeah, in this final session, we're just going to give you an update on some changes that have been happening to Community Land Scotland recently. And then Josh is going to talk a bit about the Perth Declaration, as Ailsa said. So as an organisation, I think you've heard today, we're well into our teenage years. It's our 15th anniversary this year. And the organisation has grown quite a bit over recent years. We were very lucky that one of our funders, Esme Fairbairn, gave us some funding this year to look at our structures and what we were doing as an organisation. I thought, do I want to tell people at the end of the day the thrilling story of an internal restructure of Community Land Scotland? And I thought, yes, I do. So the organisation has now divided into 3 departments, and our job titles are changed, which is why possibly if you've asked a staff member today what their job title is, they may have looked slightly confused for a minute before they remember. But the organisation now has 3 areas of work: policy and advocacy, which Josh leads and Nuri works in, and we have a new member of staff starting in a couple of weeks to provide Josh with some support. And then we have communities and operations, so that's our team that is out supporting communities, that's running our heritage work and running the organisation as well. And we have our shiny new natural capital project, which we'll be hearing about tomorrow. We had a consultant who came in and just wanted to check with us, were we still doing the same thing we wanted to do? As an organisation, our main functions are really around being your voice as a community land sector and trying to change policy and legislation, raising awareness and providing support, but also helping to build a movement so that you all feel part of an organisation where you're getting support from other community landowners. The consultant was really harsh, like she really grilled me on like whether we still wanted to do all the same things that we'd done at the beginning, but we decided that we did. The people who were involved in setting us up, some of whom are in the room today, did do a really good job of deciding what was needed by our members, and haven't really changed that much over the years. Immediately after this, we'll be having a quick EGM just to change our mem and arts so that everything in our articles matches what we're actually doing as an organisation now. And we're just making a few practical changes to the way that we run as well. So don't know how people are going to take this, but we're not going to be having another conference for another 2 years. So we're moving away from having an annual conference, and then the intermediate years we're going to continue the Simon Fraser series that we've started in memory of Simon Fraser. So that will be a lecture or some other event, and we'll be doing a lot more regional events, going out, bringing people together on a regional basis. Community Lands Festival will continue, which we run in partnership with the Scottish Government, which is great. And this year we're planning to do a much bigger focus on community engagement, because that's what everyone's been asking us for. So our events and everything this year will have a much greater focus on community engagement. So we're hoping to help you with that. And I will hand over to our Director of Policy and Advocacy. He assures me he doesn't wear this outfit to Scottish Land and Estates Conference.
What a beautiful photo to introduce me to. Hello everyone, if I haven't seen you yet today, nice to see you. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the Perth Declaration. I will try and keep it brief. Last time I was here talking, I overran quite considerably. My colleagues remind me regularly. So if you were there at the conference last year, you'll be aware of this. If you weren't, on the last day we ran a session to think about what all of your priorities are. And we did this collaboratively, democratically. Everyone was on tables, they drew together their ideas, and then we voted on it at the end. So I'm just going to quickly reflect on those 6 areas. Some of the work that we've been doing, we've focused on some areas more than others for various legislative and practical reasons, and then think about a little bit about the work we've been doing and maybe looking towards the future. What do we need to do over the next year? And some of what I'm going to say is actually modified slightly after the discussions we've been having today, particularly in the last session. So I'm going to finish on a slightly different note than I was planning, because I want to talk a little bit about some successes, modest as some of them may be, and then do a little bit more kind of thinking about visioning. So we identified 6 key areas, or you identified 6 key areas that we took away and then published, and then we've done some kind of policy and advocacy work around this. So the first one was to have secure, diversified revenue streams at the heart of community-led organisations. Community engagement, which we've just been discussing between community landowners and their communities, is purposeful, tailored, timely and continuous. Land reform to address wealth imbalances. The right to live in your community, so addressing the housing crisis. A Scottish Community Wealth Fund, and an inclusive and enabling environment for high quality apprenticeships and jobs being created. Those were the 6. And the approach that we took to kind of creating change was focusing on some key bits of legislation. So obviously there's a land reform bill which has been discussed already, there's a review of community right to buy, there's a community wealth building bill which has just been introduced. We've also increasingly been doing coalition working. So Elsa earlier mentioned the Housing Alliance, so working with Community Housing Trust, South of Scotland Community Housing in a collaborative way. We've also set up, or been part of the organisation setting up the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy, so that's us working very closely with Development Trust Association Scotland and Community Energy Scotland, and particularly renewable asks, which I'll touch on in a moment. And as part of the Land Reform Bill work, being part of leading on pulling together a coalition which includes environmental NGOs, agricultural organisations, and one of the points we've been making in the campaigning workshops, which we've just had, is that what we're trying to do is pull together different organisations that have the same kind of ethics and politics. They may focus on slightly different areas, so that we're talking to government about particular issues of importance to our members, but it's coming from organisations that the government is not used to hearing it from. And we're also using this coalition working as a means of pulling in different skill sets. So we don't have a lot of expertise in renewables, but we're quite good at working on policy and doing advocacy. So we can work with Community Energy Scotland, who have a much more technical expertise, and together we make a much stronger team. So to touch on some of the kind of progress that's been made, and I won't go through them individually, so because some of them speak to each other. So secured, diversified revenue streams, that's very closely connected to the work we've been doing on the Scottish Community Wealth Fund. So to touch on that first, so in terms of the renewable energy work, in that coalition that I've just mentioned, we've had some kind of key asks of the government. Of the 4 key asks of the Scottish Government, 2 of them have already started to be actioned. So one of that was a review of the good practice principles, trying to increase community benefit payments. That consultation closed. We're hopeful that the £5,000 per megawatt, which was referenced earlier, is going to be increased, hopefully as a percentage of turnover rather than a fixed amount, but we'll wait to see. There's also been a repowering working group set up, so without getting into the technical detail, some of the community energy turbines are coming up to a point where they need to be repowered. We've encouraged government to set up a working group to properly look into that. And then the big ticket item for us, which there's a workshop on tomorrow morning if you want to discuss it more, is the idea of a Scottish Community Wealth Fund, which came out of the discussions in the Perth Declaration, and we've now taken forward and are at the point where we're discussing it in quite a lot of detail with government. Had a meeting with the Minister for Community Wealth Building yesterday, who's very keen on the idea. None of that has actually delivered anything yet, but it's only been a year, and we've had some very positive conversations. The Community Right to Buy review came up earlier, so this is kind of thinking about land reform and access to revenue streams for communities. The consultation is coming out next month. We can't talk about what's in the detail of it yet, but we've seen the consultation, and within that, the government has just accepted various things that we've been feeding back to them over the last couple of years that need to change with Community Right to Buy, that aren't even being consulted on, they're just being changed. And the areas they're asking for input on changing are, we feel, very much steps in the right direction. And finally, onto the Land Reform Bill. So earlier it was mentioned there's 507 amendments in, which are going to start being debated on Tuesday. It's fair to say, and Andy will keep me right on this, the bill is not as ambitious and not as impactful as it could be. But there have been a number of government concessions due to the lobbying that various organisations have done over the last year, with things, without again getting into too much technical detail, with half an eye on the clock and the fact it's the end of the day. Things like the threshold for measures being landholdings falling under the measures that are being introduced. It was at 3,000 hectares. The government's accepted that needs to be lower, and it's now aligned at 1,000 hectares. There was compulsory aspects of land management plans and engaging with communities. Breaches for not doing those was set at £5,000 for a landowner. That's now gone up to £40,000 and can be recurring annually. There's also a number of amendments around land management plans which have just been accepted by the government. And if you look at the amendment list, within that 507, there's lots which are pointless or are negative, but there's lots of very progressive ones. And even if they don't actually get into the bill themselves, there's going to be some very productive discussion, I hope, over the next month in which the government is going to be encouraged, if not forced, to give concessions either in the future to land reform or at the next stage of the bill. I could keep talking about the bill, but I won't. So these are some kind of modest successes. And a lot of this has been built on the kind of advocacy work that we're doing, and that is Norrie, who, if you haven't met, is just there in the front. And you should speak to if you're one of our members or you're a community, because if you want a story championing, he is the right person. An example of this is the right to live in your community. So this was something that came out very strongly, essentially addressing the housing crisis. And this is something that we are obviously doing work in terms of kind of policy work with the Housing Alliance, putting pressure on the government around the housing fund, but it's also an example of how, and again something we discussed in the campaigning workshops, how when you have a hook, you have a media hook, it's not just about creating a moment of a media story, it's about creating some kind of meaningful attention on a particular issue that you then back up with robust policy suggestions and means of kind of continually putting pressure on. And we've had a couple of examples over the last 6 months where we have seen some real success, which has kind of highlighted issues of real concerns to our membership, but has also provided avenues for having conversations with government about what actually needs to change. And so with the right to live, that was actually our first indirect foray onto TikTok, where BBC News picked up this, and one of the younger BBC journalists did a TikTok point on this. This was also in the news cycle for well over a week, and any of you who have experience of putting stuff in the media, that's no mean feat. But all of this happens not just in a vacuum, but is about putting pressure on politicians, on officials who are thinking about the rural housing crisis. But if you've got stuff in the media, having worked in the government before, every morning they're looking at what's in the paper. It's a really effective means of creating some change, if it's backed up with good, strong policy ideas. And then the other one, which has happened more recently, which some of you will be aware of, is the focus that we've been putting on the Church of Scotland, who have been behaving less than admirably when it comes to disposing of their assets and their engagement with the community. And this is an ongoing story which we will be doing a lot more work on, and as Linsay can attest, has driven a lot of attention, and we're speaking to a lot more communities that we may not have spoken to before because of this focus we've been doing on the Church of Scotland. And this has come from conversations with our membership who have concerns about these particular issues. So this is an open call to please come and speak to us if you have particular problems. We can try and do some work around it. And normally it's speaking to a bigger issue than just the issue that you're having. It's usually a structural thing that we can make a bigger issue of. And so just to conclude, it would be useful to get all of your input, either now or just as we have our quarterly policy workshops, on whether or not those 6 asks from the Perth Declaration are still fit for purpose, if they're still the things that you care about. Alongside that, there's obviously an election next year. We are, over the summer, going to be developing our manifesto asks, and we would very much encourage you to get involved in that. And building on from that, thinking about some of the things that have been discussed earlier, so Michael and Peter speaking earlier, as part of that manifesto development, I think we need to make a really strong case for the economic and social impact of the work that all of you do. We need to kind of re-fire the debate and talk about the fact that radical change can happen, radical change does happen, but it needs to happen much quicker and on a much bigger scale. So despite the kind of modest successes that we do rightly need to talk about, we also need to think about the fact that actually not enough is happening. And a lot of what is happening is not structural and is not as redistributive as it needs to be. So we need to start thinking much more about meaningful taxation, limits on ownership, much more compulsory powers that are actually being used to change land ownership. And the manifesto development and the visioning that the Land Commission are doing are kind of key parts of this. We need to know what our end goal is so that we get proper policy that works back from that, so we know where we're going. We can't keep having these land reform bills that tweak around the edges. We need some proper meaningful change. And to get proper meaningful change, we need truly radical interventions. And to do that, we need political support and we need good ideas. And that's what the next year is going to be about as we build towards the election. And I think that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Any questions for Josh or Linsay in the last 5 minutes or so? There's a lot in there. Yes. Yeah, well, but just, oh no, just wait for the mic. Just.
Hi, John. We roll our communities together. I think they move forward. There's some chance that they'll meet another study.
My understanding is no. So when we were drafting the press around this, again, that's you can get a lot of media attention around a really important issue, and the fact that it's in the paper, you know, caps it then has to reference it. So there was one right of appeal that has been unsuccessful from the landowner's perspective, so that is done. So we are seeing the first modest compulsory sale to a community organisation, and it's encouraging to hear politicians say that they want to see this be the kind of starting gun on the thing. But it's very interesting and challenging to see a right of that used for that. So it would be great, but it could be true. But if any of you are thinking about using this part of the community right to buy, we are speaking to a lot of groups. Linsay, I think you may speak to this better. But if you are thinking about it as a piece of land in one of your areas where you want to use it right like this, which is absolutely something that you could do, and I spoke with politicians about your case exactly. We'd really encourage you to do that. And what we need now is some precedent. We have some legal precedent. We need more and more case to come, because actually that established more and more precedent, and then it becomes normal. So it's really important case.
We've been public hiring in this week and in the back because a lot of communities have no consumption, so really engaged our awareness of that, also making people feel that it's actually a realistic ownership. So a few communities maybe that can come in these stages. So yes, I'm very happy to see more inquiries on this community. Well done, that's it.
Thanks, Linsay. Any questions? I think just one thing I wanted to echo, Josh, is we've got all the amendments now to the bill, so those of you that don't know, the bill is presented, there's lots of debate, and there's now 7 amendments, as Josh said. We've just been trying to get a sense of these anti-amendments, and I think from discussions that we've had, there's not now really any objection to some of the principles as we're past that, but it's some of the detail. I mean, what's your sense of Scottish Council Estates principal objections to the bill, or other principal objections to the bill?
Well, there's not as many objections to the bill as you might hope, which I think is an indication of the fact that the bill isn't actually as impactful as it could be. There's a lot more amendments to be through, and pro-land reforms, which probably indicates the fact that the bill doesn't do as much as it could. Some of the amendments that we don't know where they come from, but some of the amendments that have been taken by Conservative MSPs, some of them we could agree with. You know, there's technical ones around the role of the Commission or the role of the Commissioner. There's other ones which talk about removing entire sections which won't be engaged with. There's other ones that are anti-renewable energy infrastructure. But there aren't really key ones apart from around some obligations around land management plans, and some that they're trying to remove the access code and around deregulation. We're going to oppose. Most of them we are just going to ignore, because we're fairly confident that they're just going to be battered away. But there are a couple of ones that are potentially more dangerous, but only which I think is a bad indication of the nature of the bill. You want to see loads and loads of amendments coming because they're really scared about what it's going to do.
Thanks, George. Okay, so no other questions. We'll
finish the session today then. Just a reminder, if you're a member, if you could please stay. We won't keep you very long at all. I've got 4 pieces of information to get across to you apparently. The conference dinner is downstairs in the cafe at 7 o'clock. If you're not sure if you're booked for dinner, please have a word with Jackie, who's sitting, blonde hair, green dress, front row. After dinner, if you want to continue the conversation, we'll be heading across to the pub. If you don't know where the pub is, catch a member of the staff or the board and follow us along. We're going to be starting back at 9:30 tomorrow morning, so again, if you could make sure you're on time. And then actually the final most important thing, everyone knows it's really midgy here, but actually if you're thinking of sitting on the grass, there's also loads and loads of ticks. So if you're not from the Highlands, you don't know what a tick is, this is the opportunity to find out. So just be careful if you're going to lounge about on the grass. But thanks everyone for today. Thanks very much for all your contributions, and we'll see you at dinner. Thank you.